COVID cases are on the rise and Ohio regains its swing state status. Joining us on Columbus on the Record this week, Julie Carr-Smythe, State House correspondent for the Associated Press, Shannon Jones, former state legislator, and Joseph Mas of the Ohio Hispanic Coalition. 6 weeks into the state's reopening, COVID cases are on the rise in Ohio. Ohio ended the week with 987 new cases in a 24-hour period. Southwest Ohio, the Cincinnati and Dayton area, is seeing the sharpest increases, and health experts say the spike in cases cannot be explained away by the fact that Ohio has increased testing. As for the reopening and state policy, Governor DeWine says the process continues. He has not reclosed any businesses. And while he pleads with people to wear a mask, he will not mandate wearing them.
What you're seeing in Cincinnati, what you're seeing in Hamilton County, what you're seeing in some of the counties in Southwest Ohio is worrisome. And we can control that. And the way we control that is wear a mask out in public. Shannon
Jones, you can hear it in the governor's voice. It's a little more urgency to it than it has been the past few weeks. He's worried about the sharp increase in cases. You represent an area down in Southwest Ohio. What's going on down there? What are folks saying?
Well, look, I think the viewpoints are across the board, right? So some people are wearing their masks and are socially distancing. And then there are those who are choosing not to do that. But there's no question that the governor has their attention. Whether or not they take his advice, I guess, remains to be seen. But it certainly is a prudent thing for people to be doing, is to wear their mask.
Shannon, are folks down there worried about the rising cases? It's not an explosion, but it's a pretty sharp increase.
So, look, the people who are taking the science seriously and believe that the governor has really strong leadership in this area are, taking extra precautions. There's certainly those people who don't share that point of view, but I would say that the vast majority of people that I know are taking it seriously. They have been taking it seriously all along, and I think they'll continue to be vigilant, because what they know is, in order to reopen the economy, to get people back to work, is we have to figure out how to live with this virus in our midst. And so wearing a mask, socially distancing is all part of that.
Joe Mas, go ahead. Did the state open too soon?
Mike, I think it's interesting that we now a perfectly timed data is available to us because of the experience that Europe is showing, for example, and the Far East for that matter. And we have something to compare the reaction in the state of Ohio and in the entire United States vis-a-vis the rest of the world. And even with that, even having that data available, it seems like people are still resisting. Too many people are still resisting, putting themselves, because it's not just themselves who are at risk, but everybody else.
If you get off,
and it's baffling as to why that is the case, and it's baffling as to why can't we do something better than that.
Yeah, if you get off social media and the chatter that the extremes on both sides are saying, if you look at the poll numbers, there's a new poll out this week that basically Ohioans are saying that the state is basically doing it the right way. A Quinnipiac poll shows that 60% of Ohioans say Governor DeWine and policymakers are handling it just right. 19% say the state is opening too fast. 19% say the state is not opening quickly enough. Julie Carr-Smythe, that really is a perfect Goldilocks policy. It sounds like the Ohioans appreciate that Governor DeWine is opening the state just right. Not too hot, not too cold, just right. Do you think that could change if we see a spike?
He is now going to have to, he's going to be challenged to respond to this spike, because it is most definitely going to challenge everyone when we start to see the median age going down to 42 and many more cases among young people. And I think that what happened, in my opinion, is just, the good weather and exhaustion from all of the sacrifices of staying indoors and trying our hardest and thinking we had maybe beat it, and maybe reacting on an individual basis, not the governor, but individual Ohioans thinking that the time was right to just relax their guard.
Shannon, the governor mentioned in his news briefing on Thursday that he is working with local officials. And whenever I hear someone is working with local officials, I think, well, does that mean that they're going to come to a consensus, or he's going to leave it up to them to mandate wearing masks, or he's going to leave it up to county officials and city officials to shut down businesses? Do you think that there could be businesses shut down, particularly in your area down Southwest Ohio?
I mean, I haven't gotten the sense from the governor that he's going to be shutting out businesses. What he has been doing, though, is talking with the local public officials about what he's concerned about, what they're watching, and asking for our help in order to keep things from getting out of control. And so, that there may come a time where that's a possibility, but I don't get the sense that that's, where his head is. As it relates to wearing masks, part of the problem is the communication from the very beginning on mask wearing has been all over the board, and there's not been any consistent messaging about mask wearing, whether it's from the president on down. And so, it's no wonder people are confused or concerned about it. That's certainly legitimate. By the same token, I think it's legitimate for the governor to say, okay, we've been trying to reopen. We've been doing it in stages for precisely this reason. So if we need to take extra precautions, we have the opportunity to do it. So it's in all of our best interests to do those things that we know will stop and limit the spread, so we can continue to reopen the economy.
Yeah, I think early on, Dr. Fauci even, there's a clip that keeps popping up on social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, where he at first said wearing a mask, might do some good, but probably not. But I think now most health professionals, almost all health professionals, are saying wear the mask. If both people are wearing masks, it lowers your chances of catching this down to like 6 or 7%. So that's where
even lower than that. Yeah.
I mean, and I see, it's funny I see people wearing masks, and more people than not wearing masks, and it's almost kind of striking when you don't see them. Joe, should it be mandated? Should the city of Columbus mandate you wear a mask outside?
Absolutely. I think so. I think that is where we find ourselves. The problem is that our system of government, our system of laws is very clunky when it comes to that. And then you have a political direction led by the president himself that advances the not wearing a mask as a political statement. If you wear a mask, Donald Trump considers it to be an affront to him. And it is unbelievable that we find ourselves there. But to answer your question straightforward, yes, I would like to see the state, for that matter, mandate the masks. And I think you'd be surprised as to how quickly this can be put under control.
Julie, if you recall, Governor DeWine first said mandatory masks, then 24 hours later said, okay, no mask, just a strong recommendation. Yeah. Do you see any state officials changing their policy on that, or even some of the big stuff, Julie?
Yes, and that goes to Shannon's point that the messaging on masks has been very inconsistent. I mean, some of it is political will, some of it was evolving scientific information about what was right, what was needed or not. And so what we saw was the governor say, absolutely, you have to wear this, and then changing his mind because of political pushback. Yeah. People don't want to be ordered. And I think as we try to go back to the new normal and we begin to go into situations that are unfamiliar, for example, returning to socializing or going out to a restaurant, or today I actually had a worker come into my home. Like, these are situations where None of us knows the rules exactly, unless we mandate, okay, every time anyone's in anyone's house or in anyone's yard or outside or anywhere, have a mask on, unless you're by yourself or in your core pod, as they call it, all the people that you live with and have already been exposed to. So I think that the government could help everyone if there was a consistency and a firm unified message around masking.
Shannon, should we have waited 3 more weeks? One of the benchmarks that health officials point to was getting a testing to a level where you could monitor and control the virus. And we're just now getting to that. We've just exceeded what the Harvard experts say for daily tests in the state of Ohio. Should Ohio have waited just 3 more weeks? Would that have made it better?
Well, look, I think one thing we've learned over the last 3 to 4 months is that we can look backwards and second guess all of the decisions that have been made. Public health officials and elected officials are, learning as they go. But the point really is what we know today. And what we know today is to be concerned that there's an increase in cases and that masks help. And so the focus has got to be, how can we communicate clearly to constituents and residents the need to wear masks?
All right. Let's move on to our next topic. The protests may have decreased in size and become less frequent, but calls for police reform continue to grow louder. This week, many members of Columbus City Council called for a ban on chokeholds, a ban on no-knock warrants, and the use of chemical agents like tear gas. Some have called for the demilitarization of police. Columbus Mayor Andrew Ginther supports some, but not all of those changes. But he promises to form a civilian review board, and he challenges the police union to get on board.
And I'm calling on the FOP to be part of the process the community demands. But with or without you, the Civilian Review Board will be seated by the end of the year.
Joe Mas, that's a pretty ambitious guarantee. Can the mayor live up to that?
Yes, I think he can, and I think he absolutely has to live up to that. We have no other path forward except to empower the community in order to oversee the police. And that is, in essence, that is the first step. That is not the last step, but that is something that, in my opinion, is going to happen, no matter what, whether the FOP likes it or not. However, I think that at least the other panelists know that the FOP is empowered by virtue of their contract with the city that, in fact, guarantees a number of protections for them, which are legal protections in the event that somebody were to file a lawsuit or use the use of force as a defense. So that kind of complicates things, but Civilian Review Board, absolutely.
Yeah, the police contract, I believe, expires, I think, the end of the calendar year, if not the end of the fiscal year, but certainly the end of sometime in the next 6 to 12 months. So that the mayor does have a bit of leverage there in trying to renegotiate it. Shannon Jones, how much power do police unions have after all of what we've seen in the past month? Do they have the same level of clout that they had before George Floyd?
Look, I think the better question is what kind of influence does the community have over the policing of its own community? And the onset of video has really changed people's perspective. They want to know more than they've ever known before. Most people don't have any involvement with law enforcement on a day-to-day basis. And so it's been really shocking to people to see the video evidence of, maltreatment and abuse. And so I think you have an awakening of people to say, look, we want to understand this. And if it is indeed isolated, as some say it is, we want to be sure that that's the case. And so we want to be a voice, a partner with the community in understanding this. And so, what people feel about individual policies and procedures, or what they feel about the union, I think is the less important factor than the fact that average citizens who've never had regular contact with the police are standing up and saying, whoa, we have a right to understand what's happening in our community, and we demand to be a part of the solution.
Julie, you've covered police and government interaction with police and police unions during your career. The problem is the average citizen generally doesn't vote in city elections. Police unions do. Police unions raise money that gives to candidates. They have the political backing to resist change. Will that resisting of change continue after all this is said and done?
They are extremely powerful unions for the reason that they have, to this point and through some really tough times, been able to retain the sense of goodwill of a lot of the powerful at state houses around the country. You know, they're seen as, we have, the first thing we have to do is make sure police are funded, make sure firefighters are funded, and this whole movement is calling into question sort of those assumptions about who are the good guys here and who are the bad guys here. Obviously, we all know that many and most police are trying to be beneficial to their communities. But what is happening is that something like use of force policies, which we have not seen in anything but about a third of the states, nobody wants to mandate restrictions on that. And it's not nobody, but, it's difficult to do. And I think that that's because of the clout of the unions. They can throw their weight around with politicians and have a lot of influence on things like that. I mean, one of the striking things to me in Ginther's remarks there is, we'll see this civilian board by the end of the year. The end of the year is an eternity away in political terms, and in real terms, when you have people demonstrating every single weekend all over the country and all over the world. Yeah. So, just saying we're going to review it and then pushing it off for 6 months is sort of an example of how, with that open contract, they know that they have a lot of work to do in order to find a compromise.
Joe, getting to the use of force exemptions, like for instance with tear gas, the city of Columbus order was you cannot use tear gas or pepper spray unless the protest turns violent. You can't use a chokehold unless the officer feels his or her life is in danger. Do you need those protections? Because policing is a nasty business, and there are bad people out there, and protests do go violent, and people do bad things. Where is the line between an appropriate use of force and just banning it altogether?
Well, interestingly enough, there are some guidelines, and the United Nations helps us a bit here with respect to the use of force in demonstrations. They say that it is improper for the police to use tear gas or pepper spray generally to the demonstrators if there are isolated groups or isolated individuals that are abusing their right to freely assemble. In other words, the ones who are throwing the water bottles and the plywood signs and things of that nature. But that doesn't mean that they can then. It's open season on all of the protesters. So that is clearly wrong. The use of chokeholds is clearly wrong. And that is something that they do not need. They have other weapons, quote unquote, at their disposal that it doesn't have to get to that. Look, at the end of the day, and Shannon said something really interesting. She said that a lot of people say, well, these are isolated cases. And as a consequence of that, I think they don't want to think about it. They say, well, it's rare, therefore, it's okay to give the police license to use force in those cases that if it's lethal, it's lethal. The police encounter individuals who have misbehaved. That should not be a death sentence to somebody who has broken the law. And we've seen too many of these cases that it was for selling cigarettes or for not getting out of the car or whatever that have tragic consequences.
Yeah, the cameras definitely is really the game changer. Both the police warn cameras that I'm sure that cities will be tougher on police officers to make sure that they're always on when they're supposed to be. And also, cell phones and smartphone cameras are everywhere. And that's been That's been the difference. Our last topic, it looks like Ohio has regained its status as a swing state despite Republican dominance in nearly every statewide office, despite having a Republican governor with a 75% approval rating. The race for Ohio's electoral votes in the presidential race is a toss-up. A Quinnipiac poll released this week shows Joe Biden with a 1-point lead over President Trump, which basically means they are tied because they are certainly within the 5-point margin of error. If you recall, Donald Trump won Ohio by 8 points in 2016. While Ohioans think President Trump is the better candidate on the economy, they like Joe Biden for everything else, handling a crisis, the coronavirus response, healthcare, and race relations. Julie Carr Smythe, is it safe to say after Donald Trump's big win in 2016 that Ohio is back in play?
Actually, I think it's not necessarily safe to say because we're all very cautious about misreading some of the polls in 4 years ago and thinking that Hillary Clinton was running away with a race. And I know the pollsters have revisited that and said, really in the end, in the few days, right toward the end, they adjusted their numbers and their polls weren't so far off. But at the same time, yes, I think that I'm one of the examples this past week. The Ohio Republican Party had to expel a former chair, Matt Borges, for campaigning essentially to try to get Biden votes. And so these are the kinds of things that we see from some more, I guess you'd consider more moderate or more fed up Republicans who are somewhat uninspired by the record and the leadership style and pattern of mistruths that we're seeing in the president.
Shannon Jones, this poll really showed the divided nature of our state and of the country. 93% of Ohioans support Republicans support Donald Trump. 92% of the Democrats oppose Donald Trump. I mean, it's clearly divided. But when candidates down tickets start seeing Donald Trump's numbers erode, when do they not necessarily stay lockstep with him on everything? And is that a sign that he's in trouble here in Ohio?
I mean, look, we just don't see that very often. I mean, every time I think that Republicans will start breaking ranks because the poll numbers of the president, keep declining and his favorability is going in the tank, you think that you'd see more of that. But the truth of the matter is you see great polarization. The Republicans are staying with the Republican. The Democrats are staying with the Democrat. And I think the question becomes, what do independents in Ohio do? That is, in essence, what the swing state is all about is, are all of the independents, of which Ohio has lots of voters who are unaffiliated, where do they vote this time around? And I think the polling is a lot better, and it's telling us that independent voters, women voters, suburban voters aren't necessarily willing to give Donald Trump the same benefit of the doubt that perhaps they were willing to give him 3.5 years ago.
Joe Mas, if you look at the approval ratings, Donald Trump, I think, is at 43% approval. Joe Biden's only at 42%. So that tells me that, they don't like Trump, but they're not too psyched about Joe Biden. The enthusiasm level just isn't there yet.
So that's true. And I'm not sure that the enthusiasm level will be there ever.
Yeah.
But what Biden doesn't have is the negatives that Hillary Clinton had when she was running.
Yeah, let's get Joe Mas real quick on that. What's the enthusiasm on Joe Biden?
There is very little enthusiasm with respect to Joe Biden. And I'm both surprised and not so surprised. But it's exactly what the nation needs at this moment. I think we need a non-exciting candidate. I am concerned as to, particularly with the young voters, about their lack of energy and support for Joe Biden. But I've been worried about that for 4 years, and I knew that was going to be a problem when it rolled around.
We're going to get to our off-the-record comments. And Joe Mas, I'll start with you.
Very good. As City Council and the General Assembly debate the use of force by police, and the uneven enforcement of the law against people of color, I hope that they give some attention to the laws that they have instituted that too often places the community in the crosshairs of law enforcement. A visit to an arraignment court in any county in Ohio on any day of the week will reveal that they are populated by poor people and people of color. We need to ask ourselves why.
Shannon Jones.
Look, I think if this race is even close in the state of Ohio, the presidential election is going to go to Joe Biden. Donald Trump won't stand a chance.
All right, and Julie Carr Smythe.
This division is also going to play out with the statue debate, the Confederate flag debate. I think those issues are not gone. We're going to see them run through the November election as the various factions fight over how those should play out.
And I predict that something else will happen between now and Election Day. Who knows what it is, but the way 2020 is going, something else is going to happen. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Check us out online. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and you can see each episode at our website, wosu.org/COTR. For our crew and for our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week, and we'll talk to you right before the 4th of July.